Oh, welcome back, champions. I've removed 95% of what I want gone out of this thing. Ready to build her up, Buttercup. We've removed the power transformer. As discussed in previous episode, we're changing to 240 volts, which required the replacement of the transformer because it was a non-universal mains transformer. When I say universal, I mean it's got multiple windings on the primary, so you can reconfigure it for different voltages. The one that this one came with was just straight up 120 or 117, whatever it is, volts, so no good in Australia without a step down anyway. You can see down here where the chassis mounted grounds were on the transformer bolts, and they pretty much peeled off when I removed the screw with just hand pressure on the wire. This one was a bit more stubborn because it had half a kilogram of solder attached to it. But we're going to go through and clean the chassis in this whole area. I've removed some of the switches and stuff in the back just to get access to that rear area. Removed the rectifier socket because everything was disconnected from that anyway. So we'll give that an ultrasonic clean. Maybe even do that to the output valve sockets as well. But I should be able to clean them in situ just to avoid disconnecting everything. One interesting thing I noted is the HT feed came straight off the rectifier and went straight to the standby switch. So when you're switching the amp out of standby, that rectifier valve's getting the inrush surge from charging those caps up. No Vibrolux schematic I could find anywhere had that configuration, but it did look factory, and it does have this cheap shitty PVC wiring where the colouring from the wire tends to bleed onto the chassis. I think they probably had a big surplus deal of random wiring back in the day. It goes really stiff too. It's very low quality wire, so we'll replace that, but also reconfigure it so the standby switch is after the reservoir capacitor bank. So that means the rectifier warms up, slowly charges the largest caps in the amp, the reservoir capacitance, which is the two first caps which are parallel to each other. So it slowly charges them as the rectifier valve warms up, regardless of what position your standby switch is on. And then when you flick the standby switch on, it just connects the rest of the HT circuit to those two caps. So they deal with the inrush, the rectifier is somewhat protected. Happy days. So yeah, I haven't seen that on any sort of Fender amps of this caliber. They generally all have that capacitor bank connected via a wire that goes from sort of here. Well, that's where the wires disappear down into the capacitor board on the other side, and that little bundle down there. They normally have one wire that comes up and goes to the rectifier, and then two wires that come from here that go to the standby. So yeah, strange. It looks like it's factory too, so not sure if that was a mistake or what. Back there, I've just cleaned off and removed the wax from the bias and cap boards. Not so much leakage an issue, but I just want to silicone the new caps to the board, and they won't stick to wax. So this way they'll have a fighting chance to stick to the board for some mechanical support, and I was just reworking the bias board anyway. It had some weird, it looks like there's been some spray paint or something in the chassis at some point, and there was like a spray paint residue on the boards, which I cleaned most of it off. We've removed that weird push button switch for the output load switching. We've removed the dummy load thing on the back. There's no need for that for the customer's purposes anyway. I'm not sure why that was there in the first place. Got to do a bit of excavation to get to that cap down there without melting anything, so I'll rework that, and in the process we'll just return the wiring to stock with the addition of the line out. I may as well leave that there, it's not hurting anything, and it's just one less hole to deal with on the back. It would still function, it's just a very basic attenuated line out pulling from the speaker output. So speaking of excavation, I'm going to have to dig right down in there under all these tag boards and stuff to get to these bypass caps. And you can see this stuff just been tack soldered because nothing can make it, or you can't have that many connections through a single eyelet. So some of this will have to be redone in a similar way, but I'll use some better splicing techniques. You're just trying to fit too much into one eyelet there. You know, all the plate loads actually tested well within tolerance, so we can leave them in. I'm not going ahead and replacing stuff I don't need to in this one, or in any one for that matter. Down here, the grid leaks and the plate loads for the phase inverter, which often these plate loads often drift. They've already been replaced, and it looks like they've got some carbon films down there, maybe Allen Bradley by the looks of them, but they all test within tolerance. Everything that's in still tests within tolerance. And some of the stuff like the screen grid resistors and whatever that was out of tolerance or close to it. And I know from experience that they do continue to drift pretty heavily with usage. Bear in mind this amp hasn't been used in 20 years. So we might fire it up and things will test okay now. But if things are on the verge of their tolerance, like right on the edge of tolerance, they're probably going to drift rather quickly as this thing gets a good workout over the next couple of months. So we're going to preemptively change them. There's no advantage to having carbon composition screen grid resistors, so we'll just upgrade them to some 3-watt metal films. So we've cleaned up the front panel, just carefully with a moist rag. And I've removed all the duct tape, the white duct tape covering all the other logos and stuff. I'll probably do the same to the foot switch and actually print some proper labels on the Brother P Touch and stick them on. It's still going to look like a modified amp, but it'll just look a little bit more professional, a bit more presentable. So I'll just make a clear little label that says foot switch, or maybe like channel foot switch, something like that, since there is another foot switch in the back which controls the tremolo and the reverb. And these two inputs are still your typical Fender setup, so I might just put channel switching input or something and just get rid of this text there with a little bit of isopropyl. Carefully, I might dilute that one a little bit just so I don't hurt any of the silk screening there, even though it does have a lacquer over the top of it. Alright champions, we're just recapping the wee little cap board. I just put a tiny smidge of neutral cure translucent silicon there, just to lock it in, Eddie. That's a joke only Australians will get. So we're going for 2222. We got rid of that third cap that was mounted inside the chassis. And 16 for the phase inverter and preamp nodes. I was tempted to go the original 16 for everything, like you'd find in a true Vibrolux. However, with the channel switching, probably want a little bit more tightness on the first node there, being that there's like a master volume and everything, and a lot of the overdrive might be derived from the preamp rather than the output stage, which would be the traditional Vibrolux way. I really would like to get my hands on a 60s Vibrolux and make it a true representation of a Vibrolux, because I've only ever had one true Vibrolux, and I'm not talking the reissues because they're very dissimilar to a true Vibrolux. I had one earlier in this year and it had 16 everything, low B+, had the undersized output transformer. Everything worked together to make a beautiful squishy Vibrolux that we know and love, and it was one of the most responsive and awesome intuitive amps to play through that I've ever played through from Fender. And nothing really comes close. I did a video a while back called What Makes the Vibrolux So Special or something like that, where I went over it all. That was that amp. Looking online, the few that are available, listing price like $10,000 for a 1966. Of course, listing price is never sale price. Looking at the sale history on Reverb, they're going for somewhere between $6,000 and $8,000. So I can't really justify that, particularly when there's a speaker of unknown quality, and you know, you probably do have to do some restoration work to it as well. You'd be up for like 8 or 9 grand by the time you get a roadworthy amp, and then you're worried about someone stealing it. But they are magical things. I'm toying with the idea of maybe one day making just a single channel Vibrolux, you know, like almost like the Rob Robinette Black Vibe, but Vibrolux version, which has got all the character traits of a Vibrolux, but just the vibe channel. And maybe have a pull switch so you could switch between the tonality of the normal and the vibe channel in terms of the brightness and the EQ. That'd be a cool little project, a nice compact chassis, but then you're sort of the 2x10's part of the tone as well. The fact you got two 10-inch drivers, you kind of need that wide chassis. So maybe I should just build a Vibrolux, bro. Maybe that's what I'm saying. I don't know. I'll have a think about it. Let me know in the comments. Engagement bait. So we're going to redo all the mains, get that new transformer in there. I'll clean the chassis and everything first, rejig this HT wiring, and then we'll basically get the thing fired up, test for stability, test for board leakage, and go from there, champions.